Shalom, everybody, and welcome back to the Renaissance Woman page. I just wanted to follow up on a few concepts that we talked about last Sunday about recognizing when you're in a toxic work environment. And I thought it would be great to, along with some of the leadership books that we're reading, also offer some other alternative reading. And I have to go to a classic, The Value in the Valley by Iana Van Zandt. This is a oldie but goodie, and I can say that it definitely, when I read it in my 20s, changed my perspective on taking accountability for myself and how I can change my own situations. And the reason why I chose this book because I believe that once you recognize that you are in a toxic work environment, and we're talking about how to navigate that environment, right? You have just found yourself thrown headfirst into the valley of discernment and transformation. And what that really means is we talked about this is recognizing the first step is admission, right? In anything, and that is recognizing the toxicity. That's your first step. And then once you and recognizing it, it gives you an opportunity to do some self-reflection, to check your status in geography, if you will. So you can expect to go through a roller coaster of emotions from anger, sadness, disappointment, and even grief, depending on how you found yourself in this particular valley. Because guess what? You obviously took this job because you wanted. You were excited about it. More than likely, you even prayed for this job, right? You wanted this opportunity. And now that you've got it, you're there, some time has passed, and you have just discovered, oh my God, I'm in a toxic working environment. And I think the reason why it takes a while at times is because everything is shiny and new, so you're not paying attention to the little things. As a matter of fact, a lot of the little things that have happened were actually some, there were microaggressions, but you ignored them because you just wanted to brush it off because, hey, you just got there. You don't want no smoke. But this is the path to put you on a journey towards revitalization, resilience, and gives you an opportunity to redefine your path and see where you're going. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to admit where you are. And yes, I'm going to say, take a look at how you engage. What do you do to contribute to the toxic work environment? And sometimes contributing to it can simply be ignoring the red flags. But if you're a person who over time, you are outspoken. You're not going to take it, right? And you'll find yourself in conversations with coworkers who will admit and acknowledge that you are in a toxic work environment. So, what do you do when you find yourself abandoned by the amen choir, right? Because when the conversations are going on, everybody's like, yeah, this is messed up. We need to do something about it, particularly if it's against management, right? Everybody's on the bandwagon when the conversations are being had. And so you may be the leader of the group. You may go and you're the one that's doing all the writing. You're the one doing all the organizing. But guess what? When it came down to it, all of a sudden everybody abandoned you. And what, that also is something that has you have to face as part of the reality that a lot of times in these toxic work environment situations, you are going to be left to stand alone. And it's not personal. It's not for you to start finger pointing and disliking the other people because a lot of times, and I have seen this before, people will allow a toxic work environment to go on because they feel like, well, they're not messing with me. I'm just going to keep my head down and I'm going to mind my own business and lay low. But one thing about toxic people, they will not allow you to keep your head down and lay low. Eventually, they're going to come for you. And I tried explaining that to some individuals, and it didn't work, of course. And eventually, they were all picked off. Literally, almost the whole department wiped out one by one. And so the turnover, it was always high. Constant influx of new people in and out, in and out. And it gets to a point where you have to make a decision. And I had to eventually fold them. Unfortunately for me, it took me over 20 years to do it. But eventually I got tired and I moved on. You know, so let's talk about this toolkit. So once you have acknowledged the situation, your toolkit is going to include self reflection. And those of you who are subscribed to the Hebrew Woman Show, you know we're talking about leadership over there. And we always talk about 2 Corinthians 13:5, where it says to examine yourselves. Know ye not your own selves, how Christ be in you, except ye be reprobate. So if you don't examine yourself and know where you are, you will find yourself in a reprobate mind state. You will find yourself in situations and difficulties that you did not have to become entangled in, one of those entanglements, because you're not paying attention. And that is why you're thrown headfirst into the valley of discernment and transformation. You're going through this valley because there is something in you that needs to shift. And once you recognize that you're in this place, that's where you enter the chrysalis stage and your transformation begins. So, part of going through this transformation, I would say you have to think about finding a support system. And a lot of times you cannot do that within the workspace. The proximity to your coworkers gives the appearance of friendship because you're with these people every day. You're eating. You're a great part of your life is spent at work with these people, right? So it gives the illusion of friendship. It gives the illusion of inclusion that you're one big happy family. Well, in this case, you're part of one big unhappy, toxic family. These people at work, your coworkers, they're not your friends. And when it comes down to you versus them, they are always going to throw you under the bus because these people have families to provide for. A lot of them, their job is not their life. They have children, they have husbands, wives, or whatever they have going on. And they're not going to put their living, their well being on the line for you. If they don't feel like it's worth the gamble, worth the risk, you're going to often find yourself standing alone. So, are you ready to deal with that? So, that's part of the conversation, too, talking about the pros and cons of filing a complaint. And I will say the risk is greater if you are in the public sector and you're not on a unionized job. If you're not on a unionized job, there are less protections and you're also less likely to get your coworkers to band with you. And in those cases, you may have to think about your exit strategy. You may have to just actually lay as low as possible, document everything. And when I say document everything, I showed you all my calendar last Sunday. Get you a good calendar where it has notes, where you could put in dates in the block parts. This happened on this day. Terrell did blah, 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 blah. Somebody did, because you're going to try to remember the dates that these things occurred of. Anything that happens on the job that you note of as toxic, that you know that's inappropriate, and even if it's and immoral, write it down. Keep track of these things so when you go and if you do have to file litigation, you have a running tally of everything that has occurred. Okay. And then I would say find you a mentor, therapy, like-minded peers, but do that outside of your job because the people at work are not your friends and they're not going to stick by you because there's no reason for them to. They don't owe you anything. They don't owe you loyalty and you don't owe them loyalty either. So it is, and I know that sounds cold and heartless, but it is what it is. And it's part of when we talk about accepting what is, we will say all day, we should all over ourselves. Well, people shouldn't act this way. People should have integrity. People should speak up when they see wrongdoing. And I would agree with all that. But at the same time, getting people to actually do that when they're worried about how they're going to pay their bills or what's going on in their life, they're not interested in your problems at work, so to speak, your issues with management or other coworkers. You may literally have a bully in your workplace. They go around disrespecting and bullying other people. Sometimes, if they are a high performer, it is in management's best interest a lot of times to ignore their behavior, and they will sooner get rid of the you versus the high performer for calling out the toxicity. Same way with HR. Human resources is not your ally, they're not your friend. Their sole purpose is to defend the company. So guess what? They're going to have to stand, they're going to more than likely stand by the manager, the leader, whoever it is that is in supervision, because to not do so would be an admission of guilt and fault. And a lot of companies are less likely to do that. We've seen a lot of videos here lately where we saw managers engaged in problematic activities, but rather than address and fire, the toxic manager, the employee was let go. So that is a reality that you're going to have to deal with as well, knowing going forward that HR and your coworkers are not on your side. People are, and as a matter of fact, in order to stay out of trouble, sorry about that. In order to avoid trouble, some of your coworkers are even willing to lie. So you have to deal with that. You may be in a situation where you need to record at all times because people will come to you and they will spin and tell another narrative. Myself, when I have meetings, especially with people who I lead, I record all meetings. And that's something that we're allowed to do. I always give the announcement this meeting is being recorded because we actually tend to do it on a live stream. And I've just found that being recorded and being upfront, it eliminates the possibility of anyone telling any untruths because everybody can watch what happened and how the meeting occurred in real time, and you can even get a script. So that's a tool I highly recommend. If you're allowed to record meetings, record them. And if why not? Transparency is always the way to go. So let's talk about. I'm welcoming you to the Valley of Discernment and Transformation, and we talked about acknowledging the reality and embracing the situation as it is. Embracing doesn't mean you're saying it's okay. It just means you are focusing on your locus of control. You are acknowledging and understanding that this is what it is. And so now the only thing I can do and the only thing I can control is me. So how am I going to move forward? So you can, when you're in this valley, it is an opportunity for you to recognize it for a growth opportunity and go ahead and craft your exit strategy. And I will say, more than likely, you're going to end up doing that if you're in the private sector and sometimes in the public sector as well. Because at some point, when you are under consistent barrage of attacks, you have to have an exit strategy. And part of that may be getting more education, getting more, sharpening your skills, change your perspective. You're going to have to shift from this. Once you go through your whole gambit of emotions, you're going to have to come into the realization that you have to form a plan. And that plan has to be, how am I going to navigate my way through this? Again, document meticulously. Limit contact. Reducing interactions is essential. Keeping it strictly professional. Stay out of extra conversations. If you work with toxic people, the best thing you can do for yourself to protect yourself is not to engage in gossip, not to engage in extra conversations outside of anything that has to do with the job. Because what happens when you get involved in these side conversations, a lot of times the people will take what you said and go back and report. And oftentimes we've all played the phone game. When by the time the message comes back around, it's totally changed. So the best thing you can do is just be quiet. And I know that may be hard, especially if you're a gabber like me. It's going to be hard because you're going to feel isolated. You're going to feel alone. But that is why you want to set up an outside support system. If you're lucky enough to where you have a cubicle or office space, if you're in a cubicle, invest in a set of headphones. Listen to a podcast if you can while you're working. Talk to a friend. Listen to lives, whatever you can do to not engage with the toxic group until you're able to execute your plan. So step back from any unnecessary conflict. You don't have to attend every battle you're invited to. Sometimes your best response to things is to be quiet. Just be silent. Don't engage. Roger that. Walk away. So let's talk about the process of acceptance, going from resistance to release. We talked about recognition, acknowledging what is, letting go of should, emotional honesty, journal, pray, whatever you use to get you through. Create your own support system and practice self-care. And part of self-care is making sure that you are checking in on yourself mentally and emotionally and that you're dealing with that. Because again, you're in the valley of discernment. And you have to ask yourself this question. This is where we go back to examining ourselves. Why am I here? Because I believe that there is a lesson in everything. There's something here that I need to learn and get so I can go on to the next step. I always think of it like school. You're here to experience things and get the lessons and move on to the next level. The next level for you may be going back to school. The next level for you may be taking up a new hobby, joining a new group. So these are things I just want you to consider as we go on this journey of exploring how to navigate a toxic work environment. And we will continue this discussion on Sunday. For those of you who have questions, again, just like on the Hebrew Woman channel, our whole purpose here is for you to have a place to seek wise counsel. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, any videos that you'd like to see us discuss here, please shoot me an email at sister7@gmail.com. We are happy to answer your questions, and we'll discuss them on the next show. So SISTAH7@gmail.com. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. As always, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Have a good evening. Good night, everybody.